Good afternoon, everyone. Hope you enjoyed your lunch. My brief talk today is in honor of Esther Pole Lovejoy, past AMWA president and co-founder 100 years ago in World War I Europe of the first American Women's Hospital. Dr. Lovejoy spent years working in places of great need and doing so with scant regard for convention, convenience, or borders. I feel a certain kinship with her, although the places of great need to which I became attached are not in Europe, but in Africa, where I've spent most of my adult life providing primary and public health care. I will try over these few minutes to explain what led me and kept me there. I have no slides. I ask you to form pictures on the basis of my words. In years of grave famine in northern Cameroon, during those difficult months after the millet has run out and before the okra is yet ripe, people resort to eating wild plants and insects, whatever can be foraged. But over the hottest, driest season, when the ground is grassless dust and the more edible six-legged species are burrowed invisibly away, people must find other sources of sustenance. One of these is cattle manure. At such times, people roam the countryside to gather buckets full of dried dung. They pile the patties onto a fire, let it burn, and then spoon the cinders into a clay pot whose bottom has been punched with holes. Boiling water is poured over the ash, and the bouillon collected from the strained drips is mixed with dried leaves or petals. Ample seasoning and a slow simmer follow, and with that, a savory stew is set to serve for the evening meal. Although it might be delectable and not entirely devoid of nutritious value, I have never knowingly dined on dung. But it's helpful for me to know that there are people who must. For ignorance, not knowing about things like this is blinding and can too easily lead us as individuals and as a country to make terrible decisions. I went to medical school yearning to become a doctor in some hard-scrabble place like the one I had served as a Peace Corps teacher in rural Niger. Someplace where life was at its most elemental and fragile, and where a doctor could bring hope. 3 insoluble problems, or conundrums, or mysteries, made this choice as clear to me as a mountain stream above the tree line. Some friends said to me, "But we have our own poor on our own shores. Let's worry about them and leave other people elsewhere to worry about the rest." The children in distant lands dying of hunger, the parents fleeing persecution, the women trapped by oppression, the teenagers gobbled up by war. We owe them nothing. Let other people take care of them. My first problem, or conundrum, or mystery always, was that I could never figure out who these other people were who were supposed to be doing the caring, or what made me not one of them. On a hot, breezeless night, in my early months in Cameroon, before our hospital was yet up and running, I took a woman into my home. She was in her late 30s, maybe 40. 2 days previously, she had delivered her 18th and 19th children prematurely on the dirt floor of her thatch-roofed mud brick hut. Both babies had died. In fact, of her 19 children, only one, a 9-year-old boy, was still alive. The others had passed at different ages, a week, 9 months, 3 years. The living boy had sickle cell anemia, and in rural Africa, 9 is a ripe old age for a sickler, and already his eyes were yellow where they should have been white, white where they should have been pink. The woman was tired, exhausted, spent, as if her whole life had flowed from her, all of it, right down to these last 2 tiny premature drops. I think that if that woman were among us today, right here where we could see her, her cheeks tear-stained, her hands calloused and cracked, her cloth faded to an indeterminate color, patched and torn. I think there's not a person in this room who would not offer her a word of comfort, an outstretched hand, a piece of bread. We would not close our door to her or deny her food, shelter, or medical help for her son. We would not turn away, and we would not turn her away. If we saw her, we would not do any of those things. So my second problem was realizing that it could not possibly make any difference whether that exhausted woman or any woman like her was here beside me or was across the room or across the street or across the ocean. She was. She was real. She was desperately in need of someone to offer help. And not only could I do that, but I could not do that. Abba was a 7-year-old boy brought to our hospital one late November morning, his body slung over the back of a donkey. A teenage boy walked on either side. I would learn that the 3 were brothers whose mother had died soon after Abba was born. Their father died a few years after that, so they had been on their own for a while. I watched out my consulting room window as the older boys lifted Abba off the donkey, and I could tell already from the way the back of Abba's head nestled between his scapula that the culprit was going to turn out to be meningitis. The brothers carried Abba into my room, set him on the examining table, and then stood erect and laconic at his side as I questioned them and examined their young sibling. The boy's skin was fiery hot. His breathing was rapid and labored. He was so thin his skeleton could be traced, and raw sores had worn through it, both hips. I wrote up orders and called health workers to convey Abba to the ward, while his brothers went to the hospital pharmacy to collect materials and medicines needed to start treatment. Once satisfied that everything was being done that could be done, I resumed seeing other patients. About half an hour later, I happened to look out my window into the courtyard, and I was stunned to see the older brother untying the donkey from its tether and leading it over to the door of the ward. The teen entered, and seconds later came out again, bearing his ailing brother in his arms. I leaped out of my chair, rushed outside to ask what was going on. "We are going home," the older brother said, eyes downcast. A quick inquiry revealed that the bill for Abba's treatment had come to the equivalent of almost $12. And for this family, $12 to save the life of a 7-year-old was out of reach. The brothers explained that they would go to market on Saturday, 3 days away, sell their millet, and then, if they got enough for it, they would come back. I tried to have them understand that without treatment, Abba would not make it till Saturday. Our hospital, which depended in part on patient fees to stay open, had a system for these kinds of cases. The system wreaked havoc for the person doing our accounts, but when patients or families were unable to make a payment up front, we let them leave something in hock, a string of beads, a piece of cloth, an old watch, and then redeem it however they could over time. I offered this option to the 2 older boys. They withdrew to think it over, talk it over, and I, fearing we were going to end up with a pond donkey, started to calculate whether it would cost us more to keep the animal fed than it would cost us to treat Abba's meningitis. Fortunately, I needn't have worried, for the middle brother disappeared, and a few minutes later came lumbering back with a seatless, rimless, brakeless bicycle that we took in hock instead. Abba was treated, recovered, and a week later was discharged well. In the scheme of things, his 7-year-old life had the value of a sack of grain. What kind of world, I asked myself as I watched the threesome and their donkey disappear down our hill. What kind of world do we live in? And how can we, the rich and powerful, accept a world where the life of a 7-year-old boy has the value of a sack of grain? And I wondered how I would feel if that boy were my cousin, or my brother, or my son. That was my third problem, and it kept me in Africa doing the work that I did for over 3 decades. I always considered myself the luckiest doctor on earth to have that privilege, which was for me a font of never-ending challenge, enchantment, and joy. I would like to think that Esther Pohl Lovejoy would have understood perfectly. Thank you very much.